Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to explore exactly how a brilliant tactician built an absolutely enduring empire against literally massive odds in 17th century India. We're looking at the life and the incredible legacy of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. This is a leader who transformed the Indian subcontinent through radical military innovation, visionary statecraft, and just this unyielding drive for self-rule. So let's start with a really crucial question. How did a young man, someone dubbed a mountain rat by his enemies, outsmart the most powerful empires of his time? It's a fascinating paradox, right? The ruling powers back then had these massive, heavily armed, highly conventional armies, and yet they found themselves completely disrupted by a strategically nimble adversary who used the very landscape of the Deccan right against them.
Okay, let's dive into our agenda for today. We'll cover the rise of a warrior king, mastering guerrilla warfare, the Great Agra escape, building a naval power, the Council of Eight, and finally, the legacy of the Marathas.
Section 1. Rise of a Warrior King, the Making of Chhatrapati. We begin our story in this incredibly chaotic Deccan landscape, a region totally torn apart by rival sultanates and the encroaching Mughal Empire. Born in 1630 at the Shivneri fort, Shivaji's early life was deeply influenced by his mother, Jijabai. She instilled in him a remarkably strong sense of cultural identity. And we can't forget his administrator, Dadoji Kondyo, who trained him in statecraft. Now, the driving force behind his entire life was Swarajya, which means self-rule or independence. This was a completely revolutionary concept at a time of heavy foreign and imperial rule. Think about how radical this idea of self-determination actually was for the 17th century. While the established powers were just fighting for territorial dominance and wealth, Shivaji was fighting to establish a sovereign land totally free from injustice, a place where subjects of all backgrounds could live without religious intolerance or oppression.
His timeline is just a staggering record of rapid ascent. Get this, at just 16 years old, in 1646, he seized the Torna fort. 16! Over the next few decades, including the famous Battle of Pratapgarh in 1659 and his wild escape from Agra in 1666, he systematically captured key forts, outmaneuvered massive armies, and survived incredible captivity. Finally, in 1674, he was formally crowned Chhatrapati, officially marking the birth of a sovereign Maratha state.
Section 2. Mastering Guerrilla Warfare, the Mountain Rat. It's one thing to have a grand vision, but it's a whole other thing to have the tactical genius to actually execute it against overwhelming odds. To achieve this vision of Swarajya, he desperately needed legendary, unconventional military strategies.
So he utilized Ganimi Kawa, the Marathi term for guerrilla warfare. This was all about leveraging the incredibly difficult Sahyadri mountains against the slow, massive armies of his foes. Instead of engaging in huge, open-field battles where, honestly, his smaller forces would have just been crushed, he relied on small, highly mobile groups. They'd execute rapid, hit-and-run raids, disrupt enemy supply lines, and then just immediately retreat right back into the rocky hideouts of the Western Ghats.
The crucial point here is this classic David versus Goliath contrast. This is exactly why this history still matters so much to modern military strategists. His agility completely neutralized their brute strength. Think about it. The Mughals relied on these enormous supply trains and heavy cavalry that were really only suited for flat plains. On the flip side, Shivaji's Maratha forces were light infantry. They traveled light, scavenged, and lived off the land, and relied on hill forts. This made them incredibly unpredictable and, frankly, virtually impossible to catch with their lightning-fast retreats.
A practically cinematic example of this ingenuity happened at the Battle of Pratapgarh in 1659, when he outsmarted a towering assassin. The Bijapur Sultanate sent this massive general, Afzal Khan, to eliminate him under the guise of peace talks. While anticipating a trap, Shivaji wore concealed armor under his clothes and actually hid this small, deadly weapon known as wagnak, literally tiger claws, right in his hand. When Khan attempted to crush and stab him during their supposedly friendly embrace, the armor saved Shivaji. He instantly struck back with the tiger claws, securing an absolutely legendary victory.
Moving on to Section 3, the Great Agra Escape, Defying the Emperor. Let me tell you, it took immense audacity to humiliate the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. After the Treaty of Purandar forced him into a truce, Shivaji was invited to the Mughal court in Agra in 1666. But when he got there, he was insulted and promptly placed under house arrest.
What followed is seriously one of history's greatest escapes. where a feigned illness and some baskets of sweets turned a deadly trap into a legendary triumph. Here's how he did it. First, he feigned a severe illness. Then, he started sending out massive baskets of sweets to holy men as religious offerings. Once the guards grew complacent and eventually stopped checking the baskets, well, Shivaji and his young son Sambhaji simply hid inside them and slipped right out of the fortress at night. It was a massive embarrassment for Aurangzeb and totally cemented Shivaji's political image as a leader who simply would not yield as he went on to rebuild his empire.
Section 4. Building a Naval Power. Father of the Indian Navy. Beyond the mountains, Shivaji recognized a totally different frontier, the ocean. You see, while most Indian rulers at the time focused almost exclusively on land warfare, Shivaji looked right to the sea. He realized, way before many of his contemporaries, that securing the coast was absolutely vital for both economic and military survival. He famously declared, "The safety of coastal trade and marine trade depended on naval power." It's so true, especially since the waters were dominated by European powers like the Portuguese, the British, and the Dutch. To protect his state's trade and defend against any coastal invasions, he knew for a fact he had to build a fleet.
So he established the Maratha Navy in 1654, and he built a diverse, formidable naval power that didn't just play defense. It actively executed strategic raids on enemy coastal ports and protected trade from those European navies. He constructed incredible marine forts like Sindhu Durg, and remarkably for the time, his recruitment was based purely on skill. He hired skilled lower-caste Hindus and Muslim mercenaries alike to man his ships. It's really no wonder he is rightfully remembered today as the father of the Indian Navy.
Section 5. The Council of Eight. Progressive Statecraft. Now, conquering territory is only half the battle, right? Managing it requires absolute systemic brilliance. Once he was crowned Chhatrapati, he needed an administration that could govern efficiently while he was out there managing constant warfare. To solve this, he introduced the Ashtapradhan, or the Council of Eight, establishing a truly merit-based bureaucracy where ministers held specific portfolios. For example, you had the Peshwa acting as prime minister or handling general admin, you had the Amatya for finance, the Senapati as commander-in-chief, the Sumant as foreign minister, and the Nyadish as chief justice. Interestingly, because the Maratha state was in pretty much constant conflict, almost all these ministers, except for the chief justice and high priest, also held full-time military commands. Along with government structure, he really reinforced his kingdom's cultural identity. He did this by formalizing the use of Sanskrit and Marathi in state affairs. He actually commissioned a glossary to replace Persian and Arabic administrative terms with Sanskrit equivalents, and he even used a Sanskrit official seal. He was actively reviving ancient traditions that had been sort of marginalized under the Sultanates.
Bringing us to Section 6, Legacy of the Marathas, an Enduring Influence. Let's take a look at the lasting footprint of this incredible ruler. Because by the time of his death, he had laid the solid foundation for an empire that would eventually come to dominate the Indian subcontinent.
His influence wasn't just about territory, though. His progressive administration left a legacy of deep religious tolerance and strict protection for women. Plus, his asymmetrical warfare tactics, sophisticated supply chains, and espionage networks totally inspired modern Indian military and naval strategies. He really sparked a unified resistance that, much later down the line, challenged the British Empire.
And just to put his territorial success into perspective, by the time of his death in 1680, he had secured around 240 strategic forts. 240! He permanently altered the map of India. Each one of those forts was an intricate piece of this massive logistical network that sustained his troops and kept his people safe.
I'm going to leave you with this thought. If a 17th century king could revolutionize military logistics and naval defense to humble massive empires, how might his strategies of asymmetrical warfare apply to our modern world? The strategic genius of the mountain rat isn't just history, it's a timeless masterclass in strategy. Think about how agility, intelligence, and resourcefulness can overcome sheer size and brute power. Those principles are just as vital today as they were way back in the 17th century. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.